In today's video, I'm going to compare and contrast two different styles of binoculars. They're both from the same manufacturer. Maven makes both of these, but there's a huge difference in price, and there's also a pretty big difference, obviously, as you can tell, in size and weight. And so I'm going to tackle this from kind of a whitetail, Midwestern, turkey hunting perspective rather than out west, because I have more experience with that. And yes, I'll go through and kind of explain on paper what some of the differences are and why that translates to a higher price with one versus the other, but also just kind of in the field what to expect in terms of actual perceivable differences. And it's not necessarily geared to try and get you guys to upsell and get a more expensive pair of binoculars, because in all reality, for a lot of you guys, a pair like this is probably going to be more than enough. So that's really the intent here, is just to try and give some information to help you decide if maybe a more budget-friendly binocular more suits your style, or if you might actually get some benefit from spending a little bit more and getting a higher-end pair of binoculars. So first off here, we have the C2 7x28 binoculars. They also make this in a 10x28. I prefer the little bit lower power for Midwestern hunting because a lot of times I'm in pretty heavy cover, so a little bit wider angle of view is nice, a little bit steadier picture, and I don't need the extra magnification all the time. These binoculars are $200 list price, so I refrain from using the word cheap because $200 is still a good chunk of change. But there's obviously those ones that are, sub $100, $60, $50, $20 pairs on Amazon. They're obviously a huge step down in quality compared to what you're getting here. Pretty good value, I think. I actually got these for $160 on sale on Amazon. Binoculars right here, these are B2 7x45s. So in comparison to maybe your more common 8x42, you're getting a little bit larger exit pupil here with these binoculars at the 7x45. They also make a 9 and an 11x in those versions. And then you're also getting, once again, with that 7x, a little bit larger field of view, a little bit more steady type of a picture than you'd get with like an 8x or a 10x. So that's again why I prefer for Midwestern hunting the 7s versus one of those higher powers. Although for turkey hunting, there are cases where a 10x or something to that effect might be totally fine. The weight on the C2s is 12.4 ounces, whereas on these 7x45s, 33.3. So not only are they more than double the weight, but they're also about double the size. So that's something to keep in mind too. Some of the differences on paper that help describe why there's a price difference: the C2s are manufactured from Japanese and Chinese components in the Philippines, whereas the B2s are all Japanese components assembled in the US. Magnesium construction versus polymer construction. You also have a different prism type, and just the components in general a little bit higher end inside the B series binoculars here. The B2s are also IPX7 waterproof rated, whereas these are IPX6. The C2s here are really intended to be just that nice, good value pair of binoculars that you're always able to keep on you because you can stuff it in basically any pocket. You can put it in your pack pretty easy. It's not something you're going to need a big binocular case or bino harness to really carry around. So I think it's really geared toward the guys that don't really have optics as a big part of their overall strategy and needs, but still want to have the option to be able to glass something up if they need to. Whereas the B2s here, everything about these is really designed to try and optimize your low light viewing performance. And when I compare these two binoculars in broad daylight and I compare one versus the other, yeah, the viewing experience and the picture and the clarity and everything is a little bit better with the B2s for sure, but I mean the C2s for a lot of guys, if you're looking to see is that a tom or is that a crow, a half a mile across that field, they're gonna be totally fine for that. That broad daylight difference is, it's there for sure, but it's not dramatic. I would say that if that's your key focus, it's probably not worth the difference in going with the more expensive pair. But as it starts getting closer to twilight and the sun's going down and it just gets darker and darker, that's when the B2s really start to separate themselves from the C2s here. And when you start going back and forth between the two, the darker it gets, the more dramatic the difference is between the two pairs. Easily with the B2s, I'm seeing better, more bright of an image and better clarity than I can see with my own eyes. Oftentimes I'll be in a tree deer hunting, and right as I'm about to start getting down and packing up, I'll hear a deer coming in, and it kind of slowly meanders its way through, and it's pretty dark by the time the deer is, say, within range. It's past shooting light, but I still pull the binoculars up to be able to get a look. And whereas my eyes themselves might just be getting kind of a dark blur of where that deer is, I'm able to, with the binoculars, go ahead and say, okay, that's an 8-pointer. He's about yay wide. and you can really get that extra detail, whereas with the C2s here, that's a little bit harder. There's trade-offs for sure, but the difference is real, and you definitely do get a much better low light experience and just overall better viewing experience with these binoculars, despite the fact that they're roughly 5 times the cost and over twice the weight and size. So for me personally, if I'm looking to choose between the two, and again, I have both of them, so it's not like I have the 7x45s, I'm always gonna use those because they're the better pair of binoculars. Oftentimes for turkey season, I'll end up going with the smaller, lighter pair. I'll throw it in a pocket of my turkey vest, and I'll just pull them out if I need to. A lot of times turkey hunting, I won't use my binoculars so much inside the woods just because of the extra movement. It's more so when I'm like glassing fields and things like that that I would want to use my binoculars. And usually you're viewing in broad daylight for the most part. So, I mean, these things are fine for that. Whereas for whitetail hunting, I've kind of gone back and forth. Early season, the way I have these things set up right now on this Rick Young bino harness, I got the rangefinder hooked up on those as well. This is exactly kind of how I'll run my system early season. And you got a thick canopy in September, early October. It gets really dark really fast as it gets close to that end of shooting light. And so having that low light capability is really important for me, and that for me drives why I choose to bring these, despite the fact that they're heavier and bulkier, over these binoculars. Now as it gets later and later into the season, then I might choose to change that up a bit. For instance, if there's snow on the ground and there's no foliage on the trees, well, then just naturally you're gonna have more light at the end of shooting light. You're gonna get reflections, you can see silhouettes. So a pair of binoculars that has a little bit lower low light capabilities, comparatively speaking, is still oftentimes gonna be good enough for me. And I might be wearing something like a Fanatic jacket where it has that little drop pocket in the front, and I'm just able to drop these things in that pocket and not have to worry about using a binocular harness that, number one, every time you put on layers, you gotta take off the harness, put it back on. And number two, that harness compresses your insulation a little bit. So if I can get by without having to use a bino harness late season, I'll do it. And you can see on these binoculars too, I just add a little hook here. I have a hiss strap that I put up in the tree, and a lot of times when it comes later into the season, I'll actually put one of those on my rangefinder too. And when I have that hiss strap set up, I'll just go ahead and drop these in here, and then they're just sitting right on the tree within easy arm's reach. But early season, since I'm not adding and removing layers really so much, then I really like having that harness where I'm just able to have those things right at the ready, easy to use. So overall, that's kind of what I would say in conclusion, is that if low light gathering is really important to you, you're whitetail hunting, you're doing a lot of early season hunting too, where you got a thick canopy, it's oftentimes pretty dark. The deer that you're hunting oftentimes will come out right at the very last couple of moments of shooting light or the very first few moments in the morning. Then these are certainly better for that type of performance. The question you got to ask yourself is it worth paying $1,000 for it? Whereas these binoculars here, you're not going to get the low light performance. But for most scenarios, I'd say like 90-10, this is going to do you just fine for this Midwestern type of hunting. Whereas those last 10% of scenarios, this really makes a big difference. If you're more of that 90-10 guy where it's like, yeah, I'm fine paying a little bit less and still getting most of the use that I would want to get out of binoculars anyway, then, I mean, certainly a more budget-friendly pair of binoculars like this is going to probably suit your needs just fine. And there might be those certain scenarios every now and then where you just wish you had a little bit more. So it's just something you have to take into consideration. So I hope this video was helpful. Again, I like both of these binoculars quite a bit. My preference is the 7x45s for whitetails, the 7x28s, and likely the 10x28s would also work perfectly fine for turkey hunting. So if you have any other questions, drop them in the comments section down below, and thanks for watching.